Basics Free Community Newsletter is what we consider to be a people's newspaper. We consider it to be a people's newspaper because in this type of society that we live in the capitalist society, the majority of people, whether they understand their oppressions and the assaults that they face on a day-to-day basis, whether they realize it or not, the majority of us are oppressed or assaulted in some way, shape, or form on a daily basis throughout our lives by this exploitative economic system that we live in. But as a people's newspaper in particular, we prioritize the working class. Because not only is the working class the most exploited and most oppressed section of our society, it also constitutes the majority of our society, and most importantly, we believe it's the working class. Working class people, the people who make this society run on a day-to-day basis, and the laboring masses of the world, whether they be peasants or whether they be workers in factories or in fields, that it's these people that constitute and have the power to actually make a serious change in the world. And there's a lot of progressive allies that can help those hundreds of millions and billions of people in the process. So what this translates into in the type of work that we do, what this principle actually means to us, is that our newspaper is directed towards the majority of people, the working class people of our society, to expose to them and to reflect back to them what they already know, but in an unsystematized and scattered kind of way, which is that this system assaults us on a daily basis, and that we are bringing to people news and views about other people from other parts of society and from around the world about what this system actually does to us. The system loves to confuse, distort, and refract out how we actually live our lives and present to us a very different image of the way we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. And what Basics is trying to do is reflect back to the majority of people in society how we actually live our lives, how we struggle, and most importantly, to overcome the cynicism and the deep despair that a lot of us have internalized because of the way our lives are reflected to us in the monopoly media. Right? The paper serves a really, really important role in showing people that every single day, right in our own city, but of course all across the world, people are fighting back, and in many cases, people are actually succeeding. Right? So a very important element of our newspaper is on the one hand, to expose capitalism and imperialism, and on the other hand, to exemplify people struggling, because we struggle on a day-to-day basis and we succeed. And so people need to know that it's not, empires haven't always existed, right? There always hasn't been the exploitation of humans by other humans. These are distinct elements of certain societies, class societies. And we're with the majority class, we're with working class people. And that's why we do what we do. So what that translates into is in our concrete work, in our day-to-day work, is that we are out there with the newspaper trying to build other people's organizations, other mass organizations that are independent, right? Independent of the state, independent of these capitalist organization fronts called foundations, right? The Ford Foundation, Soros Foundation, blah, 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 whatever, right? And independent of the poverty pimp sector, the social service sector, that although we have many friends and many allies and many good people working in those sectors, try to teach us to be dependent on the system for our day-to-day needs. Right? And of course, the system takes so much from us that we demand something in return. That's natural, right? We demand healthcare and education, and we have to fight to even protect those things. But at the same time, the system loves to induce dependency on it so that we don't know actually how to fight and struggle and achieve our own self-determination within that system. Right? So the work, a big part of the work that Basics does is to use our newspaper, which is a people's organization, to actually help develop and work with other people's organizations that are being constructed along similar principles, which is this principle of building independent people's organizations. And we do this because the system cannot fulfill all of our needs, right? If it fills our very basic needs, just so that we survive, and we reproduce ourselves so that we can go to work and be exploited the next day. But if the system was able to actually provide us with all our needs, we wouldn't be wearing our knuckles down to the bone, right, and breaking our backs, right, on a day-to-day basis. We wouldn't need to dope ourselves up with hallucinogens and stimulants and drugs and depressants just to get by on a day-to-day basis, right? Or to salve the wounds that the system gives us on a day-to-day basis, right? This is the type of dependency that the system likes to induce amongst us. So what we do with Basics is to work with genuine people's organizations that are struggling to address the needs that this system cannot satisfy. When the Black Panthers came up with the slogan, "All power to the people," right? What that actually translated to in practice, right, was building breakfast programs for children who were not being fed, right? Busing kids to school, right? Busing mothers and families to jails and prisons where young men and some young women were being locked up by the state, right? And this is the scariest thing that the Black Panthers did in the course of their work, was to build people's organizations. You know, the head of the FBI at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, identified that this was the most threatening aspect of the Black Panther Party. It wasn't the fact that they were armed and they were willing to defend themselves if attacked by the people. It was the fact that they were meeting the needs of the people. And because of that, they had hundreds of thousands and millions of supporters all across American cities, all across the United States, and all across the world. And the principle, where they learned this principle from, was a principle that the masses of people are the ones who actually make history, whether we're written into the history or not. Right? We tend to learn, when we learn in our history classes, the history of empires. You know, the Romans, the Aztecs, the Egyptians, and then there was the Greeks, the Romans, and then everything else is just a history of imperialism in its many different incarnations over time. We don't learn how the people actually built those buildings. They built those castles, right? We worked the field, and we've been at the center of history. And it's only at certain moments of history when we become conscious of our role, and we begin to fight back and take history into our hands, right? So this was a very important lesson that, as Nadine drew your attention to, that we, in the course of developing Basics, we realized that a big part of our work has to be taking people's media and spreading it across as far and as wide as possible, and bringing the lessons to people of struggles that are happening all around the world, and just the day-to-day news of how people are struggling or how people are being assaulted by the system.